There are moments in life when everything changes in a heartbeat, not because of fate, not because of some twist of destiny, but because someone made a choice. And sometimes that choice is to walk away. Imagine this. A wealthy man dressed in a $1,000 suit hits a woman with his luxury car on a quiet rural road. Her little girl, just 4 years old, is left screaming for her mother. And what does he do? He drags the woman's bleeding body off the road and drives away. No one around, no cameras, no witnesses. Or so he thought. But there was someone watching. Someone who didn't wear a badge, didn't speak a word, but would become the one silent witness that couldn't be bribed, couldn't be threatened, and wouldn't back down. A dog. A golden Labrador named Cooper. And what this dog did next, well, it changed everything. This isn't just a story about a hit and run. It's a story about loyalty, about justice, and about how sometimes the most powerful heroes walk on 4 legs and don't say a word. Let me know what you think about what Victor did, and whether you believe Cooper understood more than most humans would. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And make sure to watch until the very end, because I have a little gift waiting just for you. Now let's go back and see how this story unfolded. The late afternoon sun, a painter of opulent hues, cast long melancholic shadows across the meticulously manicured gardens of the Beaumont estate. Inside, within walls that had witnessed generations of carefully curated success, Victor Beaumont, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his tailored suits, gripped a heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquid. The ice clinked, a small, sharp sound in the otherwise heavy silence of his study, a silence that still thrummed with the ghosts of a furious argument. Clara's voice, his former lover, and the mother of his daughter, Grace, echoed in the cavernous space of his mind, each word a shard of unwelcome truth. "You can't just ignore your responsibility to Grace like this, Victor," she had hurled at him, her voice raw with a blend of disappointment and a steely resolve that had always unnerved him. He swirled the liquor, the rich scent doing little to soothe the acidic churn in his gut. Clara, he fumed internally, simply didn't grasp the sheer magnitude of the pressures he navigated, the precariousness of the empire he had built, the delicate balance of his new life with Sophia. She saw only what she wanted to see, a father failing his child. He saw a man protecting his future. Outside, where the grandeur of the estate gave way to a long, stone-paved driveway that snaked towards the ornate wrought-iron gates, or perhaps it was a quieter private road bordering the vast property, Clara Beaumont walked with a heavy heart. Her small hand was clasped firmly in that of her daughter Grace, a child of 4, maybe 5 years. Grace, a miniature echo of Clara's own delicate features, looked up with wide, tired eyes, her other hand listlessly dragging a plush, one-eared rabbit, a cherished companion. The argument with Victor, a maelstrom of accusations and bitter recriminations, had reached its zenith, leaving Clara feeling hollowed out. She'd decided a walk was needed, a desperate attempt to clear the suffocating air for both herself and her daughter, though a darker, more permanent departure loomed in the back of her mind. "Mummy." Grace's voice was a small, plaintive sigh, tinged with the innocent petulance of a weary child. "My legs are tired." Cooper, the family's loyal Labrador, a creature of boundless affection who belonged more to Clara and Grace than to the opulent trappings of the Beaumont name, trotted faithfully by their side. He nudged his wet nose into Grace's dangling hand, a silent offering of comfort, then pressed briefly against Clara's leg. Clara stooped, her movements betraying an exhaustion that went far deeper than physical fatigue. She brushed a stray strand of golden hair from Grace's forehead, her smile a fragile shield against her own despair. "I know, sweetie," she murmured, her voice a careful blend of maternal warmth and forced strength. "We'll just go a little bit further, okay?" Each step was a testament to her waning hope. She had come to the Beaumont estate, clinging to the fragile belief that Victor would, finally, honor his promises. Promises of financial support, yes, but more importantly, promises of time, of presence, of being a father to their daughter. Back within the imposing walls of the mansion, Victor's rage, initially a hot, blinding inferno, had begun to cool into a chilling fear. The thought of his meticulously constructed life with Sophia, his social standing, his very reputation being thrown into disarray by Clara's inconvenient demands, was intolerable. He needed to escape, to clear his head, to reassert control. He strode towards the garage, the click of his expensive Italian loafers echoing his Jew resolve. He would drive. He settled into the plush leather seat of his luxury sedan, the engine roaring to life with a low, predatory growl. As he accelerated down the private driveway, or perhaps it was that seldom-used access road, his mind was a tempest. The argument replayed, Clara's words lashing at him. How dare she? He seethed, his grip tightening on the wheel. How dare she challenge me in my own house, making all these demands, threatening to expose. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the speedometer needle climbing. He wasn't fully paying attention, his focus turned inward, lost in the labyrinth of his own grievances. Cooper, ever watchful, suddenly lifted his head. His ears, usually floppy and endearing, pricked up, swiveling like furry radar dishes. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he sniffed the air, his canine senses screaming a warning that the humans, lost in their own turmoil, failed to register. He barked, a sharp, urgent sound, detecting the rapidly approaching vehicle, sensing the unusual, reckless speed of Victor's approach. The world seemed to contract into a single, horrifying moment. Tires shrieked, a desperate, tearing sound against the pavement. Clara, her maternal instincts a lightning-fast reflex, shoved Grace with all her might. The force sent the little girl tumbling sideways off the direct path of the oncoming car. Then came the sickening thud. Clara was thrown through the air like a discarded doll, landing with a brutal impact on the unyielding asphalt. Grace, though spared a direct hit, was flung to the ground by the force of her mother's push, the world dissolving into a maelstrom of terror and confusion. She screamed, a raw, piercing cry of a child witnessing the unthinkable. Cooper, frantic, began to bark incessantly, a desperate, furious alarm circling Clara's still form. The cacophony of Grace's hysterical sobs and Cooper's frenzied barking shattered the genteel tranquility of the Beaumont estate. Victor's car, a sleek beast of metal and glass, lurched to a halt. He stumbled out, his legs feeling like lead, his face a mask of dawning horror, ashen and cold. The scene before him was a tableau of devastation. Clara lay frighteningly still, a dark, viscous stain already beginning to blossom on the pale stone from a wound on her head. Grace, small and utterly broken, knelt beside her mother, her tiny hands pulling at Clara's unresponsive arm, her cries tearing at the air. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Victor. He scanned the surroundings. The driveway, or the quiet access road, was, as usual, deserted. No prying eyes, no witnesses, or so he desperately hoped. A primal instinct for self-preservation, ugly and undeniable, roared to life within him. He knelt beside Clara, his fingers trembling as he fumbled for a pulse at her neck. Faint. Thready, but there, she was alive, though her hold on life felt terrifyingly tenuous. The fear of discovery, of the utter annihilation of his career, his marriage to Sophia, his entire carefully crafted existence, became a suffocating weight. Cooper, bristling, planted himself protectively between Victor and Clara's prone body. A low, guttural growl vibrated in his chest. His intelligent brown eyes, usually so full of warmth, now fixed on Victor with the look of profound distrust, of something akin to bitter disappointment. Grace, her small body racked with sobs, clung to Cooper's thick fur, her tear-streaked face buried in his side. "Mommy! Mommy!" she wailed, her voice hoarse with terror. In that moment, with the lifeblood of the woman he once professed to love staining the ground, and his daughter's anguish echoing in his ears, Victor Beaumont made a decision. It was a decision born not of malice, perhaps, but of a desperate, chilling cowardice. He had to conceal this. He looked from Clara's still form to Grace's tear-ravaged face. He couldn't let this destroy everything. He couldn't. He reached out a hand, his voice a strained, trembling whisper that sounded alien even to his own ears. "Grace, it's okay, sweetie. Daddy will take Mommy to a safe place." He attempted a reassuring smile, but it felt like a grotesque rictus on his own face. Gently, yet with an undeniable firmness, he pushed Cooper aside. The Labrador resisted, a deeper growl rumbling, his body tense, clearly unwilling to leave Clara's side, his eyes never leaving Victor's. Victor lifted Clara. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp and unresponsive in his arms. He carried her a short distance, to a dense thicket of ornamental shrubs bordering the driveway, or perhaps a shadowed, overgrown alcove a little way off the path. He laid her down, attempting, with clumsy, fumbling movements, to arrange the scene. A slip? A fall? Some tragic self-inflicted accident? The lie felt flimsy, transparent even to his panicked mind, but it was the only narrative he could cling to. Grace, paralyzed by a fear so profound it stole her breath, could only watch. Her cries now reduced to ragged, hiccuping sobs, her small hand still clutching the one-eared rabbit, as if it were her only anchor in a world suddenly tilted on its axis. "Mommy," she whimpered, the word a desperate prayer. Victor straightened, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He hurried back to his car, his eyes darting around, searching for any sign of damage. A small dent near the headlight, a scuff on the bumper. Minor, explainable. A bump against a gatepost, perhaps. He slid back into the driver's seat, the luxurious leather suddenly feeling cold and alien. He turned the key. The engine, a moment ago a symbol of his power, now sounded like a damning accusation. Cooper, momentarily pushed away, let out a volley of furious barks at the departing vehicle, a desperate canine indictment. Then, with a heart-wrenching whimper, he returned to Grace and Clara. He licked Grace's tear-stained face, then nudged Clara's still hand, whining softly, trying with a gentle insistence to rouse her. In the rearview mirror, Victor caught a fleeting, nightmarish glimpse. His small daughter, a beacon of innocence in her brightly colored dress, huddled beside the still form of her mother. The loyal dog, a steadfast guardian over them both. "She's so young," he told himself. The words a desperate, self-serving mantra. "She's too young. She won't remember any of this clearly. She can't." He pressed his foot down on the accelerator. The luxury sedan surged forward, leaving the unfolding tragedy shrinking in its wake. He drove, the image seared into his brain, the gnawing certainty that he had just committed an act for which there could be no forgiveness, a betrayal that would forever stain his soul. The aftermath of Victor's flight was a tableau of deepening dread. Cooper, his magnificent golden coat now dulled by dust and distress, did not leave Clara's or Grace's side. He pressed his large, warm body against the chillingly still form of his mistress, emitting low, mournful whimpers that seemed to carry the weight of a grief too profound for a mere animal. Then he would turn his attention to Grace, nudging her small, trembling hand with his wet nose, his intelligent eyes filled with an almost human expression of anxious reassurance. The sky, mirroring the darkening mood, bled from bruised oranges and purples into an inky, starless black. Grace, utterly spent from a torrent of tears and a terror that had hollowed her out, finally succumbed to exhaustion. She drifted into a fitful, uneasy sleep beside her mother, one tiny hand still fiercely clutching a fold of Clara's blouse, her tear-dampened head pillowed on Cooper's surprisingly soft flank. Though confusion and a primitive fear undoubtedly swirled within him, Cooper's ingrained loyalty and protective instincts surged to the forefront. He rose, shaking himself as if to dislodge the clinging horror of the past hour. Then, lifting his noble head, he began to bark. Not the playful yips of a dog anticipating a walk, nor the territorial warnings for a passing squirrel, but deep, resonant, and unceasing barks that echoed through the usually serene enclave of opulent homes. Each bark was a desperate plea, a determined summons flung into the encroaching night, a refusal to let Clara and Grace remain unseen and unheard. It took some time, the darkness now fully settled, before the persistent, strangely urgent quality of Cooper's barks penetrated the quiet evening of Mr. Harrison. An elderly gentleman with a kind, weathered face and a lifetime spent observing the subtle rhythms of his affluent neighborhood, he was tending his late-blooming roses when the sound first reached him. He paused, secateurs in hand. That wasn't just any barking, there was a desperate edge to it, a frantic insistence that spoke of something deeply amiss. Curiosity piqued, and a knot of unease tightening in his chest. He set down his tools and began to walk towards the source of the commotion. His sensible walking shoes crunching softly on the gravel path that bordered the Beaumonts' extensive property line. As he drew closer, the barks guided him through the dim light filtering from distant street lamps and the opulent glow from nearby mansions. Then he saw them, a scene that made his blood run cold. Clara, whom he recognized from her occasional visits to the area, lay unnervingly still in the shadows of a large rhododendron bush, her face pale and waxen. Little Grace was curled beside her, a small, fragile form, lost in the troubled sleep of trauma. And standing sentinel over them both was Cooper, his stance alert, his barks now directed towards the approaching figure, a mixture of warning and desperate appeal in his eyes. "Good Lord," Mr. Harrison breathed, the words escaping him in a shocked whisper. "What in heaven's name happened here?" At the sight of Mr. Harrison, Cooper's barks briefly intensified, a low growl underscoring his protective duty. But as the old man drew nearer, speaking in soft, calming tones, the dog seemed to intuit the stranger's benign intent. The barking subsided, replaced by an imploring whine, his intelligent eyes fixed on Mr. Harrison's face, conveying a desperate need for help that transcended species. "Easy there, fella," Mr. Harrison said gently, his voice full of compassion. "Good boy. You stayed to protect them, didn't you? You're a brave dog." The sound of Mr. Harrison's voice roused Grace. Her eyes fluttered open, wide and shadowed with fear, as she focused on the unfamiliar man. She whimpered, shrinking closer to Cooper. "It's all right, little one," Mr. Harrison said, his voice gentle, his smile kind despite the grimness of the situation. "I'm here to help your mommy." He quickly, expertly knelt beside Clara, his fingers searching for a pulse, his expression growing graver by the second. She was breathing, shallowly, but the gash on her head looked alarmingly severe. Without a moment's hesitation, he pulled out his cell phone, his fingers dialing 911 with practiced urgency, reporting a medical emergency and requesting police assistance. The wail of sirens, distant at first, then rapidly approaching, sliced through the night. Soon, the quiet road was awash with the flashing red and blue lights of an ambulance and a police cruiser. Paramedics, efficient and focused, hurried towards Clara, their medical kits glinting. Grace, now fully awake and terrified by the sudden influx of strangers and the unsettling urgency in their movements, clung to Cooper, refusing to be separated from her mother or her canine protector. Cooper, in turn, let out a series of low, warning rumbles if anyone approached Grace or Clara too abruptly, his body a furry shield. Sergeant Miller, a veteran cop with eyes that had seen too much but missed little, took charge of the scene. He surveyed the area with a practiced gaze, his expression thoughtful as he noted the position of Clara's body, the scuff marks on the pavement, the general disarray. Mr. Harrison, his voice somber, recounted how Cooper's relentless barking had led him to the tragic discovery, emphasizing the dog's unwavering vigil. Grace, still in shock, could only offer fragmented, whispered responses to Miller's gentle questions. "Daddy's car," she managed, her small voice trembling. Mommy fell." The terror in her eyes spoke volumes more than her faltering words. Clara was carefully stabilized and swiftly transported to the nearest hospital, her condition critical, her consciousness lost to the deep abyss of a coma. Sergeant Miller watched the ambulance depart, a frown etching deeper lines into his forehead. This didn't feel like a simple accident. The lack of immediate explanation, the child's mention of Daddy's car, pointed towards a possible hit-and-run, or perhaps something even more complex and sinister. After providing his statement to the police, Mr. Harrison, his heart aching for the traumatized child and the loyal dog, made an offer. "Sergeant," he said, his voice earnest, "if there's no immediate family available, and frankly, given what the little girl said about her father's car, perhaps he's not the right person right now. I'd be more than willing to look after Grace and Cooper for the night. My wife and I, we have a spare room and a big yard for the dog." The police, after a quick verification of Mr. Harrison's credentials and a compassionate glance at the desolate little girl, readily agreed. Cooper, sensing a haven of kindness and perhaps understanding that he needed to stay with Grace, followed willingly as Mr. Harrison gently guided the child towards his nearby home. Meanwhile, Victor Beaumont had returned to his palatial residence some time earlier, a carefully constructed mask of normalcy plastered on his face. Sophia, his young, beautiful wife, perceptive and already attuned to the subtle shifts in her husband's demeanor, noticed his strained composure immediately. He looked hunted. His tie was askew, his hair slightly disheveled, and there was a wildness in his eyes he couldn't quite conceal. "Victor, darling, where on earth have you been all this time?" she asked, her voice laced with a delicate thread of concern that could easily curdle into suspicion. "You don't look quite yourself. Are you all right?" Victor forced a laugh, the sound hollow and unconvincing even to his own ears. "Just a bit of a late crisis at the office, my love," he lied, his voice striving for a casual indifference he was far from feeling. "Nothing to worry about. Then I went for a long drive, to clear my head." He avoided her searching gaze, moving past her with a haste that was just shy of rude, eager to escape to the sanctuary of his private study. Once there, the door firmly closed behind him, Victor's composure shattered. He poured a generous measure of brandy, his hand shaking so violently that the amber liquid sloshed over the rim of the glass. He gulped it down, the fiery spirit doing little to quell the icy terror gripping his insides. He stared out the window into the oppressive darkness, the manicured gardens now appearing sinister and foreboding. Fear, sharp and suffocating, mingled with a corrosive guilt. But beneath it all, stronger and more insidious, was the primal urge for self-preservation, the desperate need to protect everything he had built, everything he stood to lose. His trembling fingers fumbled for his phone. He dialed a familiar number. Marcus Thorne, his lawyer. Thorne wasn't just any lawyer. He was a connoisseur of crisis, a master of navigating the murky waters where wealth and trouble intersected, renowned for his ability to make inconvenient problems disappear. Victor, his voice raspy, recounted the events of the evening, carefully curating the narrative, twisting the truth into a more palatable, if still damning version. "It was an accident, Marcus, a terrible, unfortunate accident," he choked out. "Clara, she just appeared out of nowhere. I panicked, I admit, I panicked and I left, but I'll take full civil responsibility, of course. I'll make sure Grace is cared for." Thorne listened on the other end, his silence as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of emotion, a precisely calibrated instrument of professional detachment. "Victor," he stated, the name a flat, toneless sound. "Leaving the scene of an accident with injuries is a serious felony, regardless of the circumstances you're painting. We need to proceed with extreme caution. Are you absolutely certain there were no direct witnesses?" "None," Victor insisted, a little too quickly. "Just Grace. And the dog." He conveniently omitted the part where he had moved Clara. "The child is young, but children can be surprisingly observant. The dog is irrelevant," Thorne continued, his mind already sifting through strategies, calculating risks. "But the fact remains, you fled." Just make this go away, Marcus," Victor pleaded, the desperation raw in his voice. "Do whatever it takes. My reputation. Sophia, she absolutely cannot find out about any of this. The scandal would ruin me." And so, while Victor Beaumont and his high-priced lawyer began to weave their web of deception and damage control miles away in the quiet, comforting home of Mr. Harrison, Grace huddled close to Cooper on a soft rug before a flickering fireplace. Her sobs had subsided into occasional shuddering gasps. The big Labrador lay patiently beside her, his head resting on his paws, occasionally lifting it to lick her small, trembling hand with a gentle, reassuring touch. Every so often, Cooper would raise his head fully, his ears twitching, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of the house, as if he could somehow sense the dark currents of injustice and deceit swirling in the night, as if he knew the fight for Clara and for Grace was far from over. The chill of the previous night had barely conceded to the pale light of dawn when Marcus Thorne, impeccably attired in a suit that whispered of old money and ruthless efficiency, made his presence known. He didn't visit the bustling police station. Instead, he arranged a more discreet meeting with Sergeant Miller at a neutral, quiet coffee shop downtown, a place where conversations, like the weak morning coffee, could be easily diluted. Thorne, with his polished silver hair and a voice as smooth as aged whiskey, exuded an aura of sophisticated control. "Sergeant Miller," Thorne began, his smile practiced, his eyes like chips of glacial ice. "I'm here regarding the unfortunate incident involving Ms. Clara Albright." "My client," he paused, letting the implication hang heavily in the air that his client was a man of considerable means and influence, "is deeply distressed by this regrettable event. He wishes to express his profound sympathy and is prepared to offer, shall we say, substantial and discreet financial assistance to Ms. Albright and her daughter, to help ease their burden during this difficult time, of course." The offer, wrapped in silken words, was as clear as it was crass. Hush money. Sergeant Miller, a man whose career had been forged in the crucible of human deceit and desperation, took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze unwavering. He recognized the gambit instantly. It was the well-worn tactic of the wealthy and powerful to sanitize their messes with cash. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Mr. Thorne," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of any pleasantry. "This is a criminal investigation into a potential felony hit and run, among other possibilities. We are not brokers of financial settlements. We will follow procedure, and we will find out what happened on that road." He leaned forward slightly, his presence suddenly more imposing. If your client has any information he wishes to provide, anything at all that might shed light on this unfortunate incident, I invite him to come down to the precinct and make an official statement. Like any other citizen. Thorne's professional smile didn't falter, but a distinct chill emanated from his eyes, a flicker of annoyance at Miller's unaccommodating integrity. "Of course, Sergeant," he purred, though the purr had an edge. "My client is naturally eager to cooperate fully with the authorities in any way he can. I shall advise him accordingly." The veiled threat of obstruction, of legal maneuvering, hung unspoken between them. Meanwhile, at City General Hospital, Clara remained lost in the silent, shadowy world of her coma. The sterile beeps and hushed whispers of the ICU were the soundtrack to her suspended existence. However, Dr. Evans, a neurologist with a quietly optimistic demeanor, noted subtle, almost imperceptible reflex responses during his morning examination. He met with Mr. Harrison, who had maintained a steadfast, anxious vigil by Clara's bedside, becoming the de facto family representative. "There are small signs, Mr. Harrison, Doctor," Evans explained, his tone cautious. "Tiny flickers. It's far too early to say anything definitive. The trauma to the brain was significant, and the situation remains incredibly complex. But it's not static. We continue to monitor her closely." Life at the Harrison home had settled into a fragile routine. Grace, cocooned by the gentle kindness of Mr. and Mrs. Harrison and the unwavering, grounding presence of Cooper, was slowly emerging from the initial shock. The raw terror in her eyes had softened, though a profound sadness lingered. She often curled up beside Cooper, her small hand buried in his thick fur, whispering quiet, rambling stories about her mother, her favorite playground, the lullabies Clara used to sing. Cooper would listen, his head cocked, occasionally offering a soft lick to her cheek or a comforting nudge. One afternoon, as Mr. Harrison was gently brushing Cooper's coat, a task the dog clearly enjoyed, his fingers snagged on something unusual in the fur around Cooper's chest and front paws. He peered closer. Embedded deep within the golden strands were several minute, dark blue flecks of what looked like high-gloss automotive paint. The color was distinctive, the kind one saw on expensive luxury vehicles. He also noticed a series of tiny, almost healed scratches across Cooper's muzzle, faint lines, as if the dog had forcefully scraped against something hard and unyielding, or perhaps tried to bite or claw at it. A prickle of unease ran down Mr. Harrison's spine. He carefully collected the paint specks, placing them in a small, clean envelope, his mind beginning to connect unspoken dots. Victor Beaumont, in stark contrast to the quiet concern at the hospital and the Harrison home, was a man walking a tightrope over an abyss of his own making. Outwardly, he projected an air of harried but controlled efficiency, attending business meetings, making calls, even managing a strained smile for Sophia. Inwardly, however, he was a maelstrom of anxiety and fear. The day after his conversation with Thorne, he'd driven his sleek, dark blue sedan, the very color of the paint flecks Mr. Harrison had found, not to his usual dealership, but to a high-end, exceptionally discreet auto body shop in a distant part of the city. He'd instructed the owner, a man known for his skill and his sealed lips, to perform a full detailing and meticulous paint correction on the front end, particularly around the bumper and right fender. "Picked up a nasty scrape somewhere," Victor had said vaguely, forcing a dismissive laugh. "Can't have the flagship looking shabby, can we?" Sophia, however, was no fool. The carefully constructed facade her husband presented was beginning to show cracks. Victor was increasingly irritable, his temper short. Dark circles shadowed his eyes from sleepless nights spent pacing his study. He flinched at sudden noises, and was unnervingly evasive whenever she gently probed about his whereabouts on the afternoon of Clara's accident, as the papers were beginning to call it, though with an increasing number of question marks. Sophia found herself watching him more closely, noting the hushed, urgent phone calls he took in his locked study, the way his eyes darted nervously when the news mentioned an ongoing investigation into a suspected hit-and-run. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the hospital lawn, the extraordinary happened. Clara Albright's eyelids fluttered. Slowly, hesitantly, they opened. Her vision was blurry at first, the sounds of the ICU muted and confusing. She was profoundly weak, a fog of disorientation enveloping her. A vigilant nurse, noticing the change, rushed to her side, her voice a mixture of excitement and professionalism as she alerted Dr. Evans. As the fog began to clear, as faces swam into focus, one overwhelming need, one primal question, surfaced from the depths of Clara's fractured consciousness. Her lips moved, forming words that were barely a breath. "Grace," she whispered, her voice raspy, fragile. Where is Grace?" At that precise moment, miles away in the cozy living room of the Harrison home, Cooper, who'd been dozing peacefully at Grace's feet, suddenly sprang to life. He let out a series of soft, agitated yelps, not of alarm, but of something akin to excited recognition. He began to pace in a tight circle, his tail thumping a rapid, unsteady rhythm against the floor, his intelligent eyes fixed on some unseen point in the direction of the hospital. Grace looked up from her coloring book, startled. "Uncle Harrison," she said, her voice filled with a child's innocent wonder. "What's wrong with Cooper? He's acting so funny. It's like he knows Mommy's awake." Mr. Harrison, though touched by the child's faith, was about to offer a rational explanation when the telephone on the hall table shrilled to life. He picked it up. It was Dr. Evans from City General, his voice tinged with an unmistakable note of triumph. Clara was awake. In the days that followed, as Clara's strength slowly returned and the fragments of her memory began to coalesce, she requested to speak with the police. Sergeant Miller arrived at her hospital room, his demeanor calm and reassuring. Clara, though still pale and weak, her voice often faltering, recounted the events leading up to that horrifying moment. She spoke of the heated argument with Victor in the grand foyer of his estate, his cold dismissal of her concerns about Grace, his mounting anger. "It was Victor," she stated, her eyes, though shadowed with pain, holding a new clarity, a dawning certainty. "It was his car, that dark blue sedan he's so proud of. We had a terrible fight, a truly awful fight, about his responsibilities, about Grace needing her father." This was the breakthrough Miller had been waiting for. Clara's testimony, though potentially colored by trauma, was a direct accusation. The investigation, he knew, would now pivot, its focus narrowing decisively on Victor Beaumont. When Marcus Thorne relayed the news to Victor, that Clara was awake, lucid, and had given a statement to the police, a cold dread, far more potent than anything he had felt before, gripped Victor. He could almost feel the walls closing in. Thorne, ever the pragmatist, attempted to downplay the development. "Head trauma, Victor," he said, his voice smooth and steady over the phone line. "Memories are notoriously unreliable after such an ordeal. Her testimony can be challenged, discredited. We'll manage it." But Clara's mind, like a shattered mirror slowly being pieced back together, was yielding more. In the quiet solitude of her hospital room, more details surfaced. She recalled the distinctive low growl of Victor's powerful engine as the car accelerated, and then a crucial, heart-stopping image. "I remember. Just as I was falling," she whispered to Miller during a subsequent visit, her hand instinctively going to her bandaged head. "I saw Cooper, my brave Cooper. He lunged, He lunged right at the front of the car, barking so furiously, like he was trying to stop it, to protect us. She even managed a hazy recollection of the car's sleek lines, its imposing grille, a flash of dark metallic blue in the fading light. Each recalled detail was another nail in the coffin of Victor's carefully constructed lies. The veneer of normalcy Victor Beaumont so desperately tried to maintain was becoming impossibly thin, stretched taut over a churning abyss of guilt and fear. Sophia, his wife, was no longer an oblivious bystander to his increasingly erratic behavior. The furtive, hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered a room, the persistent, gnawing tension that coiled around him like a venomous snake, the way his eyes would dart with a hunted look at the mere mention of an accident or the police. These were not the actions of an innocent man, nor of the confident, composed husband she thought she knew. A cold seed of suspicion once planted had taken root and was now growing with an alarming tenacity. She decided she could no longer wait for explanations that never came. She would find the truth herself. With a quiet resolve, Sophia began to sift through Victor's meticulously organized world, examining credit card statements, scrutinizing his digital calendar, looking for anything that felt out of place. Her search soon bore bitter fruit. Tucked away in a folder of miscellaneous financial documents, she found records of regular, substantial payments made to an account under the name Clara M. Albright. The reference line on each transaction was a stark, emotionless, child support, G. Beaumont. Grace. A daughter Victor had never mentioned, a whole other life he had meticulously concealed. The discovery was a physical blow, stealing her breath. Then came the emails, archived correspondence between Victor and Clara, dating back several years. They were terse, often strained, discussing visitation schedules, school fees, and Clara's increasingly desperate pleas for Victor to be more present in Grace's life. Sophia's world tilted. The man she had married, the idyllic life she believed they were building, it was all predicated on a carefully constructed lie. A profound sense of betrayal, cold and sharp, pierced through her, followed by a wave of unexpected, aching sorrow for herself, for the child she never knew existed, and even strangely, for the woman Victor had so callously wronged. Armed with this painful knowledge, Sophia made a decision that would irrevocably alter the course of events. She drove to City General Hospital. The meeting in Clara's sun-drenched, sterile room was initially fraught with an almost unbearable awkwardness. Two women, bound by the same man, yet standing on opposite sides of his devastating secret. Sophia, elegant even in her distress, introduced herself. "Miss Albright." "Clara," she began, her voice softer than she intended, betraying her inner turmoil. "I'm Sophia Beaumont, Victor's wife." Clara's eyes, still shadowed from her ordeal but clear and intelligent, widened slightly. I had to come," Sophia continued, the words tumbling out. "I need to understand. Victor, he never told me about you or about Grace. Not until this terrible accident." Clara, though her body was still mending, possessed a quiet strength. She saw not an antagonist in Sophia, but another victim of Victor's duplicity. She observed the genuine pain etched on Sophia's beautiful face, the flicker of bewildered hurt in her eyes. "He has a way of compartmentalizing," Clara said, her voice still a little weak but steady, "of keeping parts of his life separate, even if it hurts people." And so, an unlikely, unspoken alliance began to form. Clara, with a weary resignation, recounted the events of that dreadful afternoon, the argument, Victor's fury, the terrifying blur of the impact. As if on cue, the hospital room door opened, and Mr. Harrison gently ushered in a hesitant Grace with Cooper padding faithfully by her side. Grace's eyes, wide and innocent, fixed on Sophia, a stranger in her mother's room. She clutched Mr. Harrison's hand a little tighter. Sophia, her heart aching at the sight of the small, bewildered child Victor had hidden from her, knelt down, her voice soft and kind. "Hello, Grace," she said, offering a tentative smile. "My name is Sophia. It's very nice to finally meet you. Your mommy has told me how brave you are." Encouraged by Sophia's gentle demeanor and her mother's reassuring nod, Grace slowly relaxed. When Sophia, with infinite tenderness, asked about what happened that day, Grace, with the unfiltered honesty of a child, began to speak. "Daddy Victor. He was driving his fast car," she said, her small brow furrowed in concentration. And he made Mommy fall down. It was scary." Her lower lip trembled. "Cooper barked at Daddy Victor so loud. And Cooper ran after the car. He's a very good boy, Cooper. He even tried to scratch Daddy's car, I think, to make Daddy stop so he wouldn't hurt Mommy anymore." The innocent words, particularly the detail about Cooper scratching the car, hung in the air, electrifying the room. Clara and Sophia exchanged a sharp, significant glance. If Grace was right, if Cooper had indeed lunged at or clawed the vehicle in his desperate attempt to protect Clara, there might be tangible evidence, Cooper's fur, perhaps even claw marks, on Victor's sedan. Physical proof that could directly link him to the scene in a way that a child's testimony, however compelling, might not. Victor, meanwhile, felt the noose tightening. News of Clara's improving memory, relayed with grim professionalism by Thorne, sent fresh waves of panic through him. Sophia's questions were becoming more pointed, her silences more accusatory. Thorne, ever the pragmatist, urged a more aggressive strategy. "Victor, this is escalating," he'd said, his voice a cold rasp over the phone. "Her memory is a wild card. We need to neutralize this, and quickly. A substantial settlement. One that ensures her silence and her disappearance, far away. It's the only way to avoid a public, catastrophic scandal." That evening, the fragile facade of the Beaumont marriage finally shattered. Sophia, armed with the printouts of the financial statements and the damning emails, confronted Victor in their opulent living room, a room that suddenly felt like a gilded cage. "I went to the hospital today, Victor," she said, her voice quiet but trembling with suppressed fury. "I met Clara, and I spoke with Grace, your daughter. The daughter you never told me about." She laid the papers on the polished mahogany coffee table between them. "These payments, these emails, how could you? I need to know exactly what happened that afternoon, Victor. And this time, I want the truth. No more lies." Cornered, faced with Sophia's cold fury, the undeniable proof of his long-standing deception, and the looming specter of Sergeant Miller's investigation, Victor finally crumbled. In the privacy of their sterile, loveless mansion, he confessed, a carefully edited version, but a confession nonetheless. He admitted to the collision with Clara, his voice choked with self-pity. He claimed he'd been overwhelmed by panic, that he hadn't realized how badly she was hurt, that leaving was a moment of terrible, regrettable weakness. He still, reflexively, tried to minimize his culpability, to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. Sophia listened, her face a mask of stone, a sickening wave of disgust washing over her. The man she thought she loved, the life she believed she had evaporated, leaving only a hollow, bitter residue. In her hospital bed, another crucial piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Clara, a memory, sharp and sudden. Just before she and Grace had left Victor's study on that fateful day, after their explosive argument, she had seen him pouring himself a very large measure of what looked like whiskey, his hand shaking with rage. He'd downed it quickly. He'd been drinking. She immediately relayed this to Sergeant Miller. Driving under the influence would add another damning layer to Victor's actions. Sergeant Miller now had Clara's increasingly detailed testimony. Mr. Harrison's meticulously saved paint flecks, which forensics had preliminarily matched to the specific luxury brand Victor drove, the report of Cooper's minor injuries, and Victor's continued, obstructive non-cooperation. He felt the case solidifying. Clara's mention of Victor drinking heavily before the incident spurred him to consider a bolder move. He began to formulate a plan, an unconventional one perhaps, but one that might just provide the irrefutable link he needed. He would give Cooper a chance to identify the vehicle. The night of the confrontation was a long and bitter one for Sophia. The next morning, her eyes clear and her resolve hardened, she informed Victor that their marriage was over. "I can't do this, Victor," she said, her voice devoid of its earlier emotion, now chillingly calm. "I can't live with these lies. You need to take full responsibility for what you did to Clara, and for Grace." Later that day, she quietly contacted her own attorney. The mounting circumstantial evidence, Clara's testimony, the paint flecks, the reports of Victor's car being detailed, and now the potential DUI, was enough. Sergeant Miller secured a warrant to impound and search Victor Beaumont's dark blue luxury sedan. The forensic team went over it with a fine-tooth comb. They found them, minute, almost invisible scratches on the lower front bumper and grille, consistent with an animal's claws. And, caught in a tiny crevice, several strands of golden-brown dog hair. Hair that, under microscopic analysis, was a perfect match to Cooper. The final act of Victor's charade played out on a crisp, clear morning. As he, impeccably dressed, prepared to leave his estate for a business meeting he had no intention of actually attending, he found his exit blocked. Sergeant Miller stood at the end of the long, sweeping driveway, flanked by several uniformed officers. And with them, on a leash held firmly by a somber Mr. Harrison, was Cooper. At the specific, carefully orchestrated request of the police, Grace was also present, standing a little behind Mr. Harrison, her small hand tucked into Mrs. Harrison's, her presence deemed crucial by Child Advocacy Services as a key witness. Victor's blood ran cold. He slowed his car, his mind racing, searching for an escape that didn't exist. As the sedan drew nearer, Cooper, who had been standing relatively calmly, suddenly erupted. His body went rigid, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, transforming into a volley of furious, accusatory barks. He strained against the leash, lunging towards the front of Victor's car, his canine fury palpable, unmistakable. Grace, her eyes wide, pointed a trembling finger. "That's it," she cried, her small voice piercing the sudden silence that followed Cooper's outburst. "That's Daddy Victor's car. Cooper knows. Cooper doesn't like that car. That's the car that hurt Mommy." Victor stared at the scene. The enraged dog, the pointing child, the grim-faced police officers. His handsome face, usually so composed, was a mask of pale, dawning horror. The evidence, the testimony, the sheer, undeniable instinct of the loyal dog, it was all crashing down on him. He knew with a sickening certainty that the curtain was finally, irrevocably falling. The crisp morning air, moments before alive with the nervous energy of an impending confrontation, suddenly crackled with a new, desperate tension, thick enough to choke on. Victor Beaumont, trapped between the unyielding steel of police vehicles and the even more unyielding gaze of Sergeant Miller, found his world imploding. Cooper's furious, accusatory barks seemed to echo the frantic, hammering protest within his own chest, each one a nail driven into the coffin of his lies. And then there was Grace, his daughter. Her small, innocent face, pale but imbued with an unnerving, knowing sadness, watched him from beside Mr. Harrison. It was her gaze, more than the grim-faced officers or the enraged dog, that tipped him over the precipice. The meticulously constructed facade of Victor Beaumont, the urbane businessman, the pillar of the community, didn't just crack. It disintegrated, vaporizing to reveal the raw, cornered animal lashing out in its death throes. A strangled sound, part sob, part snarl, tore from his throat. His mind, a maelstrom of terror and denial, screamed one primal imperative: escape. In a move of pure, unadulterated desperation, a wild gamble against impossible odds, he slammed his foot down hard on the accelerator. The powerful V8 engine of his luxury sedan roared to life, a guttural cry of defiance that ripped through the morning's deceptive tranquility. He wrenched the wheel, aiming for a perceived gap, a desperate lunge for freedom, his only thought to outrun the ruin hurtling towards him. For one horrifying, suspended instant, it seemed his mad dash might succeed. The car leaped forward, a dark blue predator suddenly unleashed. Officers shouted, scrambling. But Cooper, a creature of instinct refined by intelligence and an unwavering loyalty that transcended mere animal devotion, reacted with a speed and precision that was nothing short of breathtaking. He didn't hurl himself foolishly, suicidally, into the direct path of the several-ton vehicle. Instead, with the explosive agility of his Labrador breed, he launched himself alongside the accelerating car, a streak of gold against the gleaming dark paint. He ran parallel to the front passenger side wheel, his barks now sharp, staccato bursts, not of undirected rage, but seemingly aimed, focused, a furious canine denunciation directed at the spinning tire itself. Then, in a dazzling display of calculated daring, he darted and feinted, a golden blur of motion, so perilously close to the car's deadly trajectory that Victor, his eyes stretched wide with a fresh, sickening wave of panic at the imminent, gruesome prospect of crushing the dog beneath his wheels, instinctively, violently, wrenched the steering wheel to avoid him. The sudden, violent swerve, executed by a man already teetering on the brink of hysteria, was too much. Victor's control, tenuous at best, snapped. His foot, which had been pressed hard on the accelerator, now in his panicked confusion, slammed onto the brake. The heavy sedan, its momentum abruptly and erratically checked, fishtailed wildly. Tires shrieked a tortured protest against the asphalt, a high-pitched scream of tortured rubber that seemed to echo Victor's own internal agony. The acrid, biting smell of burning rubber filled the air, a choking perfume of his failed escape. That brief, chaotic loss of control, that single critical error forced by Cooper's audacious, almost preternatural intervention, was the only opening Sergeant Miller's well-trained and anticipating officers needed. Before Victor could even think to try and recover, to aim his machine of escape once more, police cruisers had moved with swift, practiced precision, boxing him in, their solid frames forming an impenetrable, steely barricade. The desperate lunge for freedom was over as quickly and as violently as it had begun. Rough, impersonal hands were on him then, pulling him from the driver's seat of his once prized vehicle, now a symbol of his entrapment. The last vestiges of fight, if there had ever been any real fight left in him beyond blind panic, drained away like water through cupped hands, leaving him trembling, disheveled, and utterly spent. Gone was the arrogant tycoon, the master manipulator who believed he could control any narrative. In his place stood a broken, pathetic figure, his expensive suit rumpled and stained, his face ashen, his eyes darting about wildly like those of a cornered rat, searching for an exit that no longer existed. The crushing weight of his accumulated actions, the inescapable damning reality of his predicament, crashed down upon him with the force of a physical blow. It was an accident, he stammered. the words tumbling out, incoherent and pitiful, his voice hoarse, cracking. "I swear, I didn't mean to. I never intended anything like this. I was just so scared. So terribly, terribly scared." He looked from one impassive police face to another, seeking a flicker of understanding, of mercy, and finding only cold, professional duty. Mr. Harrison, his own face a mask of sorrowful disapproval, mixed with a profound pity for the child caught in this maelstrom, gently, protectively, led Grace a little closer, though ensuring she remained at a safe emotional and physical distance. The child, her small face pale but imbued with a startling, solemn resolve, looked directly at the crumbling, incoherent figure of her father. Her voice, though childishly high-pitched, carried an astonishing, unexpected weight in the suddenly charged silence, cutting through Victor's desperate, self-serving babble like a shard of pure, unadulterated truth. "Daddy," she asked, her gaze unwavering, her tone not accusatory, but filled with a bewildered, heartbreakingly honest quest for understanding. "Why didn't you stay to help Mommy? Why did you leave us there, all alone in the dark?" The simple, devastating question, devoid of any childish malice yet piercingly direct, struck Victor with the force of a battering ram. It was the voice of betrayed innocence, a pure, unadulterated indictment that no high-priced lawyer, no carefully crafted lie, no amount of money or influence could ever refute or diminish. It seemed to lance the last, festering vestiges of his monumental pride, bypassing his terror and self-pity to reach some long-buried, almost forgotten core of his humanity. He sank to his knees on the cold, unforgiving pavement, the fight, the denial, the arrogance, all completely gone, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably. And then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, for the first time since his own carefully suppressed childhood sorrows, Victor Beaumont wept. Not the calculated tears of a manipulator, but raw, racking sobs of utter despair, of shame, and perhaps, just perhaps, the first genuine, agonizing stirrings of remorse he had allowed himself to feel, truly feel, in front of another human being. He could offer no answer to his daughter's question. There was none that would suffice, none that could ever bridge the chasm of his betrayal. He just knelt there, a fallen idol, his tears carving clean paths through the grime on his face. As if summoned by the raw, unscripted emotion of the moment, the denouement of Victor's carefully constructed life, two more vehicles arrived, their presence adding further layers to the unfolding drama. From one, a nondescript medical transport van, Clara was carefully, gently assisted into a wheelchair by a calm, reassuring paramedic. Her doctors, in close consultation with Sergeant Miller and a trauma counselor, had agreed that witnessing this, a direct confrontation with the man who had so profoundly, so devastatingly wronged her, could be a crucial, albeit incredibly difficult step in her long and arduous psychological healing. Her face was still pale, a testament to her recent ordeal, and her body still bore the subtle marks of her injuries. But her eyes, as she took in the sight of Victor, a broken, pathetic man, kneeling in supplication on the ground, then shifted to her daughter, so small yet so brave, and finally to Cooper, standing proudly, almost regally beside Mr. Hyde. Harrison held a quiet, unyielding, almost luminous strength. The second car, a discreet town car, brought Sophia. She emerged, a figure of quiet, somber elegance, her face composed but etched with a weary sadness that spoke of sleepless nights and painful realizations. She did not approach Victor, her soon-to-be ex-husband. Instead, she moved with a determined grace towards a woman standing discreetly to one side, Clara's newly retained, highly capable lawyer, a woman known for her tenacity and her commitment to her clients. Sophia, her voice low but clear, exchanged a few brief words with the lawyer and then handed over a thick, unassuming manila envelope. It contained, she explained later to a grateful Clara, meticulously prepared documents she had had her own attorney draw up. Irrevocable trusts and complex financial instruments, all designed to ensure Clara's long-term care and, most importantly, Grace's future security and education, all funded from what had once been Victor's considerable share of their marital assets. It also contained the formal, signed notification of her immediate intent to file for divorce. Her alliance with Clara, once a tentative, unspoken bridge built on shared pain and Victor's deceit, had solidified into a quiet, powerful act of justice and profound female solidarity. With that final symbolic act, the charade was well and truly over. Victor Beaumont, his face streaked with tears, and the grime of his downfall, was formally arrested. Sergeant Miller's voice was steady, devoid of triumph, as he recited the Miranda rights, the familiar words, a stark, final pronouncement of Victor's new reality. The cold, impersonal click of the handcuffs as they were fastened around Victor's wrists was a sharp, definitive sound in the crisp morning air, a metallic punctuation mark at the end of a chapter of deceit and pain. He was led away, a stooped, shuffling figure, his former power and arrogance stripped from him as easily as a cheap suit. 3 months later, the trial of Victor Beaumont commenced in the county courthouse. It became an instant media sensation, the lurid tale of immense wealth, callous betrayal, a child's innocent courage, and a remarkably loyal dog capturing the public's increasingly avid imagination. News vans lined the streets, reporters jostled for sound bites, and courtroom artists sketched the drawn, haunted face of the fallen tycoon. The prosecution, led by a sharp, determined assistant district attorney, a woman with a reputation for meticulous preparation and unwavering resolve, presented a compelling, almost airtight case. Victor's tearful, rambling, and ultimately self-serving confession at the scene of his arrest was entered into evidence, painting a vivid picture of his panic and his culpability. The forensic reports were presented with damning clarity, detailing the irrefutable physical proof, the precise match of the dark blue paint chips from Victor's luxury sedan found embedded in Cooper's fur by the observant Mr. Harrison, the minute, almost invisible scratches on the sedan's front bumper and grille, consistent with an animal's claws and teeth, the strands of Cooper's distinctive golden hair found caught in a tiny crevice near the point of impact, a silent testament to his brave, desperate intervention. Clara, composed and articulate despite the visible emotional toll the proceedings took on her, recounted her ordeal from the witness stand. Her voice, though sometimes trembling, never wavered as she detailed the argument with Victor, his escalating rage, her fear for Grace, and the terrifying, disorienting blur of the impact. Grace, with the sensitive support of a child psychologist and a specially trained courthouse therapy dog, gave her testimony via a protected, closed-circuit video link. Her innocent, unembellished words about Daddy's fast car going boom and Cooper barking really loud to try and make Daddy stop resonated deeply with the jury and the hushed courtroom. Mr. Harrison, a pillar of quiet dignity, described his discovery of Clara and Grace, his voice thick with emotion, as he recounted Cooper's unwavering vigil. Even Cooper's extraordinary actions, his initial discovery of Clara and Grace in the desolate darkness, his relentless barking that summoned help, his fierce protection of the unconscious mother and terrified child, and his later, unequivocal identification of Victor's vehicle, were skillfully, carefully woven into the narrative by Clara's legal team. They didn't, of course, put the dog on the stand, but through photographs of his injuries, the presentation of the paint on his fur, and expert testimony from an animal behaviorist who spoke to the profound loyalty and protective instincts of Labradors, they framed Cooper's involvement not as sentient testimony, but as an undeniable, almost sentient catalyst in the chain of events that led to the uncovering of critical, irrefutable evidence. Thorne, Victor's once slick lawyer, looked increasingly beleaguered, his attempts to discredit witnesses or downplay the evidence falling flat against the sheer weight of the truth. The verdict, when it finally came after days of deliberation, was unequivocal, delivered with solemn finality by the jury foreperson. Victor Beaumont was found guilty on all major counts: felony hit and run, resulting in serious injury, reckless endangerment, leaving the scene of an accident, and even a lesser charge related to driving while impaired by extreme emotional distress and, as Clara had testified, alcohol. The judge, citing Victor's callous disregard for human life and his subsequent attempts to evade responsibility, sentenced him to a significant multi-year prison term. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read, the only sound Victor's sharp, choked gasp. He was also mandated by the court to provide comprehensive, ongoing financial support for Grace and to adhere to clearly established, legally binding parental responsibilities, though his physical contact with Grace would be severely restricted and supervised for the foreseeable future. Life, after the cataclysmic storm of the accident and the trial, began the slow, arduous process of finding a new, quieter, more resilient rhythm. Clara, her physical recovery progressing steadily, found that her emotional healing was a more complex, winding path. She used a portion of the substantial settlement funds, significantly bolstered by the assets Sophia had so honorably insured, were redirected from Victor's estate, to purchase a charming, sun-filled house in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood far from the opulent shadows of the Beaumont estate. It had a sprawling, verdant garden, a place of light and growth, perfect for Grace to play in, and for Cooper to patrol with happy, boundless, and often muddy energy. The Harrisons, dear Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, whose kindness had been a beacon in their darkest hour, became cherished, regular visitors, their presence a constant, comforting reminder of the goodness that still existed in the world. They were more than friends. They were family. Grace, though the shadows of that terrible day would likely always linger in some small, protected corner of her memory, began to heal. Her innate childhood resilience, nurtured by her mother's love and the steadfast, unwavering, unconditional devotion of Cooper. The big Labrador was an immeasurable balm to her young, bruised soul. She would spend countless hours with him in the sun-dappled garden, her laughter, once so rare, now mingling freely with his happy panting and occasional joyful barks. Her small arms were often wrapped around his furry neck in a comforting hug, her secrets whispered into his patient, twitching ears. He was, in her innocent and fiercely loyal eyes, and indeed in the eyes of everyone who knew their remarkable story, her hero dog, her furry guardian angel. Sophia, too, began to build a new life, one free from the suffocating weight of Victor's secrets and lies. The divorce from Victor was finalized quietly, efficiently. She moved on, her path diverging from theirs, yet she maintained a respectful, supportive, and surprisingly warm connection with Clara and Grace, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected, unbreakable bond that had been forged between them in the crucible of shared adversity and betrayal. She often sent thoughtful gifts for Grace and made quiet contributions to Clara's new non-profit venture. One crisp autumn day, months into Victor's incarceration, a letter arrived for Clara, the utilitarian envelope bearing a stark prison postmark. With a mixture of trepidation, a lingering residue of anger, and a strange, detached curiosity, she opened it. Victor's handwriting was cramped, almost childlike, the words on the page halting, filled with a raw, desperate remorse that seemed, for the very first time since she had known him, truly, painfully profound. He wrote of the crushing weight of his guilt, of the long, empty, echoing hours spent in his cell, confronting the hollow shell of the man he had allowed himself to become. He wrote of trying to change, of participating in prison programs, of a desperate flickering hope that one day, somehow, Grace might find it in her young, generous heart to forgive him, and perhaps even, in some distant future, know a father who was better, truer, than the one he had so catastrophically failed to be. Clara read the letter, her emotions a complex, churning tapestry of sorrow for the man he could have been, lingering anger for the pain he had inflicted, and a faint, surprising flicker of pity for the broken soul he now was. But her focus, she knew with an unshakable certainty, had to be on the future, on Grace's light, on their shared path forward. She folded the letter and put it away, a relic of a past she was determined to transcend. More months passed. The seasons turned, each bringing its own quiet measure of healing. Clara and Grace's life settled into a gentle, resilient peace. Inspired by her own harrowing journey and by Grace's remarkable quiet strength, Clara enrolled in university courses, pursuing a degree in child psychology and trauma counseling, driven by a quiet but fierce determination to transform her pain and experience into a source of strength and tangible help for other children, other families touched by crisis. Grace blossomed, a happy, inquisitive, bright child who loved her new school, her circle of new friends, and, above all, regaling anyone who would listen with lovingly embellished tales of Cooper, the smartest, bravest, most wonderful dog in the whole wide world. On a perfect, sun-drenched afternoon in late spring, the kind that feels like a warm, life-affirming embrace from the universe itself, Clara sat on a rustic wooden bench in their flourishing garden, watching Grace, now a confident 7-year-old, chase a bright red bouncing ball, her joyous, untroubled laughter echoing through the newly leafed trees. Cooper, his magnificent golden coat gleaming like spun sunlight, his tail a happy, thumping metronome against the soft grass, bounded after her, his barks a playful, exuberant counterpoint to Grace's pure delight. Clara smiled, a genuine, untroubled, deeply contented smile that reached her eyes and warmed her from the inside out. She looked at the magnificent Labrador, her loyal companion, now resting his head on her lap, his big brown eyes gazing up at her with an expression of such profound, unwavering devotion, it almost took her breath away. He was so much more than just a pet, she knew with every fiber of her being. He was family. He was a steadfast, furry-faced friend, a courageous, intuitive protector, a silent, four-legged witness who had, in his own extraordinary, almost mystical way, not only saved their lives, but had also helped bring about a measure of justice in a world that often seemed devoid of it. He was, in a very real and tangible sense, the furry, warm-hearted, tail-wagging embodiment of their hard-won new beginning. The sound of Grace's carefree, bell-clear laughter, mingled with Cooper's joyful, contented barks, filled the sunlit garden. The sweet, unmistakable and deeply cherished melody of hope rediscovered, of resilience celebrated, and of a hard-won, precious, and profoundly beautiful happiness that had finally, truly, found its way back home.